Hello and welcome everyone. Hopefully everyone will be able to see and hear me clearly. We've just got a welcome in our chat session as well. We are very excited to have you along to our CitiPower Town Hall. So today we're going to be giving you an overview of what our business plans are for 2026 to 2031, and you'll be hearing directly from our executive leadership team on what we're doing and why. So I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to join. I can see a number of people joining the meeting before we kick off. I'll also just run through a bit of housekeeping. So the session is going to be recorded. And it is being recorded. We will be publishing this online, and we want to have the opportunity for any interested CitiPower customer to be informed on our proposal and to hear this overview as well. So you might have noticed we've got cameras and microphones of attendees being off. We're taking questions via the chat function of the webinar. If you do have any technical issues during the meeting, just feel free to post those in the chat and our team will help you out as soon as possible. Alrighty, it's 12:02, so we're going to kick off. The format today is that overview of our CitiPower regulatory proposal, and then we'll be moving through to a Q&A with our executive leaders who are on the call today as well. Renate Vogt is our General Manager of Regulation. She's going to take us through an overview of CitiPower and some context around a regulatory proposal and the operating environment. We've got Glenn Thompson, our General Manager, Electricity Networks, who will take us through that key capital expenditure. We've got Alex Jones, our Chief Information Officer, who'll be providing an overview of all of the IT developments for the CitiPower network. Our Head of Regulatory Strategy, Jeff Anderson, will provide an update on changes to our operational expenditure, and our General Manager Service Delivery and Vegetation Management, James Walker, will talk through one of the key areas of operational expenditure today as well. So after this, we'll move on to our Q&A, and so we'll be taking questions through the chat and also addressing any pre-submitted questions during this session. If you have any questions that come up along during the presentation, please put them in the chat, and that'll help to make sure that we're able to get to it during that Q&A session as well. So thank you all for joining, and an overview of the agenda here. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're respectively meeting today and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm joining today from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country and recognise the traditional owners and their ancient and continuing connection to country. I'd like to hand over to our General Manager Regulation, Renate Vogt, who will take us through an overview of the CitiPower network, the changes that are being experienced and that we're expecting to experience within Victoria, and particularly the CitiPower network that have influenced our planning for 2026 to 2031. Thank you, Renate.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here for the CitiPower Town Hall session. As Jen said, my name is Renate Vogt, and I'm the General Manager of Regulation for CitiPower. So next slide, please. So who is CitiPower and what do we do? Well, CitiPower is your distribution network. We are not the transmission network, generator or retailer. We transport electricity along the poles and wires that run down your street and property and deliver electricity to your homes and businesses. So when you look at your electricity bill, we make up around 30% of that bill, and the rest is the cost of generation, transmission and retail. So CitiPower delivers electricity to Melbourne's CBD and inner suburbs. This includes some of Australia's most iconic sporting and cultural facilities, such as the Melbourne Cricket Ground, the National Tennis Centre and the Victorian Arts Centre. Our network supports over 340,000 customers, with households representing approximately 83% of these customers. We also support nearly 9,000 commercial and industrial businesses and 42,000 small businesses. We are a highly meshed network with N-1 secure planning standards in the CBD, and around 51% of our network is underground. In addition to supplying electricity to your homes and businesses, CitiPower provides over 50 services, and you can see the infographic gives you a little bit of a snapshot in terms of what those services are. So this includes restoring your power, repairing your street lights, maintenance, cutting vegetation, and providing a 24/7 customer call centre. We also own the smart meters at your premises, which allows us to remotely read your electricity consumption and identify whether or not there is a power outage without having to wait for the customer to call us. So next slide, thank you. So understanding customers' priorities and their expectations of our services has been really critical to ensuring we're investing in a network that delivers the value for our customers. So CitiPower is in the process of developing its 5-year plan from 2026 to 2031 on how much we intend to invest to operate and manage the network and delivering the services that customers want at a fair and reasonable price. We recently released our draft proposal in early September after having engaged with thousands of CitiPower customers since 2021. Now, today we're going to play back what we've heard from our CitiPower customers and how we have responded. Now, the draft proposal includes 3 parts. Part A sets out the changing nature of our future energy system, what we've heard from customers and stakeholders, and how we've responded. Part B sets out our revenue and expenditure forecasts, and Part C sets out our proposed tariff structures. Now, we've aimed to achieve a really balanced approach with additional capacity unlocked through both augmentation and greater use of smarter technology. Investments are focused on maintaining reliability while also building a more resilient and adaptable network for our customers. And we're proposing all of this with no increase in residential bills from 2026 to 2031. Now, we really do encourage you either through the Q&A session or actually providing a response to our draft proposal because we're really keen to understand whether or not you think we've actually hit the mark. Now, the Australian Energy Regulator will assess our plans to determine our level of funding to operate and manage the network safely and reliably, and they will also determine the level of funding we need and determine the level of the charges that we can actually charge our customer. So if we can go to the next slide. So the development of the 5-year plan will really coincide with the largest transformation ever in the energy sector as Victoria aims to reduce emissions by 100% by 2045. Now, electricity distribution networks are going to be pivotal in the energy transition to enable a clean energy future, and the choices made by customers and communities to help reduce carbon emissions, including investing in solar, batteries, and electric vehicles. Our strong track record to date on both service levels and price has us really well placed to respond to the change drivers that will accelerate through the next regulatory control period. However, the scale and scope of these change drivers is unprecedented. For example, by 2031, the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, is forecasting 22% of all cars in Victoria will be electric vehicles. This is extraordinary projection. That's 18 times more EVs on the road today. The Victorian Government's gas substitution roadmap has outlined a pathway to transition away from residential gas, with the first step being the ban of all new residential gas connections from January this year. And it's important to note that, in fact, Victoria is more dependent on gas than any other jurisdiction in Australia, around triple the average annual consumption of New South Wales and South Australian customers, and almost 7 times the usage of Queensland. This shift towards electrification will result in a 26% increase in annual consumption and a 10% increase in peak demand growth, which is really what drives investment. Collectively, the electrification of gas and transport will transform many areas of our network to winter peaking, with 35% of zone substations changing from summer to winter peaking. At the same time as these new electrification sources are growing, so too is our population. In 2023, Melbourne overtook Sydney as Australia's largest city, which has driven higher density construction and with single dwelling premises becoming more multi-storey and all electric. By 2031, in fact, the Victorian government has projected an increase of an additional 900,000 people living in Victoria. The scale of renewable generation will also increase rapidly through the next regulatory control period, with 65% of Victoria's electricity expected to come from renewable sources, and by 2030, before reaching 95% by 2035. Much of the renewable generation on our network is provided by solar PV, with rooftop solar in CitiPower forecasted to triple to 300 megawatts. With rooftop solar, though it does provide many benefits, including saving for customers and reduction in Victoria's carbon emissions, rapidly increasing solar uptake can also lead to system security challenges such as minimum system load. And in fact, we saw this last year in December 2023, where Victoria set a record for low for minimum operational demand. Now, all of this is happening while at the same time many of our assets, including 630 kilometres of underground cable, is approaching end of life. We're seeing increases in material and labour costs, and the continued management of meeting the higher CBD security of supply requirements. So this just gives you a snapshot of really what is driving our capital and operating expenditure into the next regulatory control period. We could jump to the next slide. So our current performance really does provide a strong foundation to adapt to these changes. However, it does leave less headroom to absorb additional growth. Now, in terms of reliability, the average CitiPower customer is off supply 18 minutes a year, which is significantly better than the average reliability performance of other urban networks in the country, who are off supply on average around 59 minutes a year. And you can see that on the slide on the graph titled Average Unplanned Minutes Without Supply per Customer. Saying this, CitiPower, as I mentioned, is subject to an N-1 secure planning standard, which leads to higher reliability performance, but it does impact utilisation. And you can see on the graph titled Network Utilisation that CitiPower's utilisation is on par with the average urban network in Australia, with the utilisation being around 42%. Now, in terms of price, CitiPower has one of the lowest network charges in the country, and we are very focused in ensuring we provide value for money for our customers. So if you have a look at the slide titled 2023-24 network charges, typical residential customer, you'll see that the average CitiPower customer pays around $385 in network charges. Now, remember, this is not your retail bill. Your retail bill includes generation, transmission, distribution, retail, and metering. So if you have a look at the slide on your left-hand side at the bottom, titled 2024-25 Residential Victorian Default Offer, this gives you a snapshot in terms of what CitiPower customers pay, and it's around, in terms of retail charge, around $1,456. And so this is very competitive, not just competitive in respect to other distribution network businesses in Australia, but also competitive relative to other Victorian distribution network service providers. If we could jump to the next slide, thank you. So we've already spoken to thousands of our customers who've helped us develop future service level expectations. In total, we've spoken to nearly 7,780 CitiPower customers, engaged 245 external stakeholders and representatives. This could include renewable community groups, councils, etc. And we've held 58 engagement events to date. Now, the message was very clear. Customers wanted a reliable, safe and resilient network, an affordable and equitable network, and a shift towards more sustainable energy sources and practices for a cleaner future. Now, in responding to our customers' expectations, we've proposed $1.2 billion of investment over the next regulatory control period between 2026 and 2031. And some of these programs we will explore further on in the presentation, but you can see the slide provides a snapshot of some of those key marquee projects and programs. Now, we are delivering all of this and more for no increase to residential bills. So we think it's a good package. So thank you. And I think the next person is Glenn Thompson, who is going to provide you an overview of our capital expenditure program. Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Renate. As Renate said, my name's Glenn Thompson. I'm head of electricity networks, which in reality just means I'm effectively look after the team that is the asset management function of the CitiPower network. So I'd like to do to start, that slide, perfect, is really just perhaps provide an overview of the dynamics driving investment in the CitiPower network and probably really just reiterating some of the points Renate has just touched on. So in some ways, CitiPower's growing geographically and vertically. In the CBD is certainly expanding and facing the challenges of the energy transition like any other network service provider. As Renate said, we also have an obligation for the CBD security of supply, which effectively as written is an N-2 redundancy for the network configuration. And this is largely due to the CBD, the importance of it to the state economy, which is similar to what other major CBDs have in Australia. There's also significant rail and tram infrastructure being delivered throughout the network, which is also there to help support the growing population which we are facing at the moment. As noted by Renate, we're certainly being impacted by the macro drivers already elaborated on, with buildings being converted to be electric, new buildings only allowed to be electric, the net zero ambition, and of course the population growth I've already touched on. With respect to EVs, as they begin to penetrate, a significant proportion of those will be in CitiPower, whether they reside in CitiPower or just come to the CBD during the day to be charged. So it's a new dynamic which we expect to have a greater impact on the second half of the next reset period. Like other networks, we're also facing increased penetration of customer energy resources, and we're seeing the emergence of a new challenge, which we refer to as minimum demand events. The last sort of decade or so have been largely focused on maximum demand during periods of heat. Now with particularly increased penetration of rooftop solar, we're facing minimum demand events where we need to manage to ensure customers are not load shed. Some other differentiators for CitiPower versus other networks. As you can imagine, in a city environment, there's often limited access to some of the sites. Assets are often down laneways, under buildings, under car parks, or perhaps in the middle of a road under high traffic zones. A significant presence of other underground infrastructure, such as cables, tunnels, water, gas, which all have to be thought through ahead of works being completed. And also a lot of constraints on when we can do work, lots of need for traffic management, areas where there's major events where we can't do works or certainly cannot turn the power off while those events are on. And the other part about CitiPower is a very old network. given that's where it started, and we still have some assets today which are over 80 years old, which we're looking to modernise through this period. In terms of delivery, a lot of our project and maintenance activities are largely driven out of resources based in our Burnley depot, complemented by other surrounding depots and specialist contractors. As our works program expands, our resourcing, fleet and field management will also need to be uplifted to match the growing reliance on electricity, and that will result in upgrades to those depots and an expanding fleet obligation to match required works. With respect to IT, like all other network service providers, this trend of increasing IT needs will continue, and my colleague Alex Jones will take you through that with some specifics shortly. But in reality, as we get heavily data-driven, there's a lot of data using smart meters. The reliance on IT infrastructure and IT investment will become more and more critical. Also, in the subsequent slides, I'll also touch on the importance of our AMI smart meters and what we plan to do there with a proactive replacement of the smart meters, which we commenced installing more than 15 years ago. And that smart meter data has ultimately put us in great stead in being able to make very effective risk-based decisions using actual data from our customers. And with that, increasing opportunity to improve compliance, get greater control of our assets, and definitely more access to monitor real-time behaviour of our assets, which is benefiting our customers in that low cost that Renato referred to in previous slides. Another point to note as a precursor to the specifics of the augmentation and replacement expenditure I'll shortly take you through is during the pandemic, CitiPower was faced with an unusual dynamic where 30% of the load dropped as everyone left home and went to either forced lockdown arrangements or into regional areas. And therefore, with that, a number of augmentation projects were paused at that point in time until we knew what forecast load would be post-pandemic. And we've certainly seen not only has that load returned, it's growing at a faster rate than before the pandemic. For those reasons mentioned before, we have smaller dwellings being knocked down with larger dwellings being placed on, old industrial areas also being replaced with large apartment dwellings. So the load dynamics of CitiPower is drastically changing. Population growth is certainly a driver, and with that is becoming increased demand, therefore more augmentation and replacement capex required. Jen or Amanda, can you go to the next slide and I'll start talking through the augmentation and replacement capex. In terms of our augmentation focused, I've already touched on the drivers for it, but we are seeing geographic expansion of the CBD. We have new developments in Arden and Fisherman's Bend, gas replacement I've talked about, and at the back end of the next period, we're certainly expecting electric vehicles to have impact on demand as well. Some of the key projects that we will be focusing on in the next period, as I said earlier, we do have an ageing infrastructure. We have some old 6.6 kV network, which we are modernising to be 11 kV. That effectively provides increased capacity. And these projects, some of which have commenced as of now, include areas and zone substations at Fitzroy, Collingwood, Brunswick, West Brunswick, and there's a lot of interplay and works between those substations to enable those works to occur. As noted, we also have several projects relating to the CBD security of supply, most notably with a number of new feeders, with the major one being around the Montague substation. And there'll also be increased capacity in the form of new transformers at BQ, which is Bouverie, Queensbury, Riversdale, Northcote, Deepdean and Collingwood. And that takes up the majority of the major projects. Next slide, please. In relation to our approach to electrification and customer resources, as you're no doubt aware, customers have for a long time been participating in the energy transition. initially through the deployment of rooftop solar systems, which continue to be deployed at a rapid rate, but they're also getting larger. Many customers are now wanting to play a greater role in reducing their carbon footprint, with numerous households moving to an all-electric future ahead of government policy. EVs, as I've touched on, will also begin to have an impact, with plug-in hybrids and full EV sales continuing to take a sizable market share. From a network perspective, this does create a new challenge. Without appropriate investment, there's a real risk that we may have limited charging capacity where there is a high penetration of EVs. So it's absolutely critical we get the investment in the right place ahead of time, or we'll end up with stranded transportation. Over the current period, we've developed a number of tools to support our focus on increasing our accuracy of forecasting, and importantly, tools and systems to help control energy flow on the network at both a low voltage perspective and a high voltage level. Our solutions and investment for the next period cover a range of activities, and we see our role as being critical to enabling increased renewable generation, providing opportunities for greater customer contribution and ensuring the energy transition is not limited by constraints in the network. Getting the balance right on the amount of investment and doing it at the right time is fundamental to our plan. These solutions include a range of cost-reflective, low-cost solutions, such as innovative tariffs, continued optimisation of our dynamic voltage management system, ongoing development of our LV and HV DERM systems, and of course non-network solutions where others may have more optimal solutions than what we can propose ourselves, increased data visibility to our customers, and the implementation of flexible exports to help us manage the network flows. All of these, coupled with the utilisation of our smart meters, will be utilised to optimise these investments to ensure we are targeting the right areas and ensuring that customers play a key role in the energy transition, not just over the next 5 years, but beyond. Let's move to the REPEX slide, please. In terms of replacement expenditure, perhaps the most significant contributor to the expenditure profile in the next period is our underground cables, particularly HV cables. And we have numerous volume and many different types, and approximately 25% of our expenditure is relating to underground cables. We're certainly observing increased failure rates, and this is expected to continue as the assets age and the load increases. As I touched on earlier, these cables are not often easy to get to. They require specialist resources, and with that, a growing resource need in terms of field resources. There's also several transformer refurbishments and switchgear replacements across several substations in the CitiPower network, probably most notably at Collingwood, Armidale and Northcote. Next slide, please. I think this is my final slide in terms of what is our plan for a meter replacement, which is a proactive replacement program. As noted, CitiPower has been benefited significantly over the last 15 years from our smart meters. These meters notionally have an asset life of 15 years, and failure rates are relatively low today, less than 1%, but they are now trending upwards. We know from the initial rollout that our current meter replacements, that a least cost method of replacement is a planned street-by-street change-out. The cost of replacing on failure is expected to be fourfold, and if there were a need to replace a fleet of meters sporadically due to failures, resources would not be available in a cost-effective manner in that time. So why wouldn't we replace on failure? Well, an example, travel and labour costs replacing meters on failure is 4 times more expensive compared to the street-by-street systematic replacement. And by way of example, on a street-by-street proactive replacement, meters can be replaced at 20 to 25 metres a day, whereas failure is 5 to 10 per day. So it's more resource intensive once failure rates pick up. And we do know that through the pandemic that when you have a scarcity of resources, labour costs will rise. CitiPower does have the benefit of a small geographic footprint so a coordinated and smooth refresh of the fleet will be cost effective to perform. And further, if we don't start soon, the meter fleet will be more than 20 years old by the time commencement in the next regulatory period, and an extended time frame required to change them out. With the meters we currently have, the AMI meters, electronic devices are just not designed like their mechanical ancestors, and we don't expect them to be lasting well beyond a 20-year period. The next generation of meters is also expected to enable further customer benefits, being potentially Wi-Fi enabled, allowing more services and products to be provided behind the meter by others. That might be the end of mine, I think, Amanda. Perhaps handing over to, is it Jeff?
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you very much. Before we move on to Jeff, we'll hear from Alex, who's our Chief Information Officer, who'll be able to take us through our key information technology expenditure. Thank you, Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Jones, Chief Information Officer for CitiPower. So that means my responsibility is for all of the technology, if you like, that runs the electrical network. So technology now really enables the energy industry transformation that's happening around us. We've heard from Renate and Glenn talking about the various innovations and changes in the network, and all of those things depend on the IT systems that run them. So over time, we've seen IT take a bigger and bigger role in the running of businesses, and the electrical network is no exception to that. So often for us, the challenge is not so much what are the things we can do with technology, but what can we leave out and still actually support all of the changes and improvements that are being made. A lot of the investment that we get, and you can see on this chart here, we've divided it into three categories. We've got the recurring expenditure, which is effectively the ongoing maintenance and replacement of the equipment that we have, and that's, you know, hardware, software, basic day-to-day upgrades, laptops, all of those things that just cycle around. And I think, as many people know, IT assets cycle a lot faster than network assets. Glenn talked about 80-year-old assets being within our network. I can tell you there is no such thing as an 80-year-old IT asset. In fact, the very oldest of our systems are part of the replacement plan that I'll talk about now. We've got the non-recurring expenditure in the light blue in the middle of those bars, which I'll talk through in a moment. And the third category here, which we're seeing quite significantly more, I suppose, than we've seen in previous periods, is what we're calling regulatory compliance. Now, regulatory compliance is probably, I don't know, it's an understatement in terms of what it really means, because what it really means is that as we introduce smart meters, customer data availability, electric vehicles, solar panel, remote control, all of these things that we need to run our current network, we can't do that individually and independently of all of the other networks. And so what happens is AEMO, which is the energy market operator, generally comes up with standards and timelines by which the whole industry needs to move. So we don't have a lot of choice with this, which is why it's called compliance. We have to keep up with what the industry as a whole is doing. But by the same token, we're not just inventing technologies to run these things for our network that others aren't doing. We are following the whole industry through the AEMO kind of direction. So that's what those regulatory compliance items are. At the moment, a lot of that's to do with distributed energy resources, so the ability to control solar panels, have data exchange in real time, and smart meters, all of those things. The non-recurrent expenditures really focuses mainly on two things in this regulatory period. The biggest systems we have in the business, which are also the oldest systems, are the ERP and billing systems. ERP is what runs, your accounts and your procurement and your asset registers. And the billing systems is what allows us to bill our customers every single day and interchange information with the broader market. These are some of our oldest systems. They've been around for more than 20 years. We've kept them around for as long as we possibly can because replacing them is expensive and also a little bit risky. You know, you tend to get more errors with newer systems. But we've come to the point now where we really cannot enhance the existing systems and maintain the standards of security and functionality that are needed. Many of the things that the market and the industry are requiring are enhancements that just can no longer be made to these systems, which are coming out of support with their vendors. They're simply saying that if we want to support those features, there's a new version of the system that we need to upgrade to, and that's what we're going to do. That's a long project that's going to run throughout most of the regulatory period, which you can see reflected there in the light blue colour on those bars on the chart. The other major thing that we're doing in terms of non-recurrent, and we call it non-recurrent because there will be recurrent elements of it, but this is actually an uplift, this is improving, is cybersecurity. And again, I mean, almost with this one, we probably could have called it regulatory compliance because, again, we're not making up our own standards for cybersecurity here. We're following very clear and specific federal government directions in terms of the standards of security in IT that are required to protect the electrical networks and the critical infrastructure. So we're mainly guided by the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, or SOCI. And so the uplift that we're doing in cybersecurity over the coming period is really laid out in great detail in terms of what all of our systems need to comply with. And so that, while some of the new systems it applies to when you buy them, because we do have a lot of systems that have been around for a while now, a while in IT terms, 10 years plus, that requires investment to enable us to bring them up to the standards of security that are required. The recurrent expenditure, as you can see, it's not increasing greatly, but as part of that, we are also modernising our technology footprint. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the OPEX slide as well, but the old infrastructure that we're running on needs to be replaced with new infrastructure. This is recurrent expenditure, but it's not a like-for-like technology swap, and some of that also gets reflected in the OPEX uplift because of the licensed nature of the software and hardware that we are going to use. So, look, I think that's a summary of what we're doing in IT. I'm happy to move to the next section. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Alex. So the next section is that we'll be discussing the key operational expenditure. So we've seen the big capital expenditure programs, but Jeff Anderson, our head of regulatory strategy, is going to take us through that key operational expenditure with assistance, as mentioned, from Alex, and we'll also have our general manager of vegetation management and network services after Jeff to touch on some of the larger areas of operational expenditure as well. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jen. So the AR's long-standing and preferred method for forecasting operating expenditure is to use a base step trend approach, and we followed this for the 26 to 31 regulatory period. Our proposed base year on which we built our forecast is FY25, so the financial year ending June 2025, and that is the penultimate year of our current regulatory period and represents the most recent year of audited RIN data that we will have available and will be available to the regulator in making their decision. On top of this base year, our step changes are far and away the largest contributor to our lift in OPEX, and over 90% of those step changes relate to either IT drivers or vegetation management. I'll pass over shortly to Alex and James to talk about those two components in more detail, but before I do, I will highlight our customer package step change, which is the other sort of key component. Our customer package step change comprises several initiatives to improve our services to customers, particularly those at risk of some form of energy poverty, and ensuring that the costs of energy services are reasonable and affordable, and empowering price-sensitive customers. It was some of the feedback we've heard from our customers and their advocates so far. And around 2/3 of our customers at our trade-off evaluation forum, so some of our earlier sort of targeted engagement around our initiatives, really supported those packages. To develop the package of customer works, we empowered our own customer advisory panel in the process to help determine its scale and scope of the program. And where we've landed includes 5 separate initiatives. So there is an energy care component, which is more around working with community agencies to better support and equip them to help their customers. There is a community energy fund, so to allow for communities to apply for funds to support inclusiveness and equitable outcomes associated with the energy transition. And we see our customer advisory panel having a role in the governance in that process. There is a vulnerable customer assistance program. So again, supporting customers to transition away from gas-based appliances by waiving network or connection costs as required. And an energy advisory services piece as well. So again, waiving some fees associated with supporting requests from community groups and welfare agencies to help inform their decision-making processes and how they can best support their customers or community cohorts. And lastly, a First Peoples program is part of the customer package as well. And that's a combination of initiatives around supporting energy equity for First Peoples, their participation in the energy transition, as well as supporting their needs in terms of community resilience, including before, during and after extreme weather events. So with that, I might now pass back to Alex to talk briefly on the IT-related step changes.
Thanks, Jeff. Look, I don't have a whole lot more to say on that. I guess the point being with OPEX step changes in IT is that the technology industry is moving towards non-ownership of IT solutions. So nowadays with cloud, you don't buy and own technology solutions anymore. You basically rent them or license them from the vendor. And that's not a choice that we have. Often we might choose to use capital to own the asset ourselves because it does give us more control over how to upgrade it and when to renew it. But the reality of the new world of technology is that increasingly we don't have that choice. And so the OPEX uplift here doesn't really reflect an increase in cost. It just reflects a change in accounting because of the nature of how we rent or license the assets rather than owning them. So that's what I've got to say on that. I'll pass it to James to talk about vegetation.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so I'm here to talk through a proposed step change in vegetation management expenditure. So I'm looking in the CitiPower network to have a reasonable step up in investment here, really born of a continuation of the story that the journey we've been on in terms of utilising technology to get a better understanding of the non-compliance in our network with regards to vegetation encroaching upon the HV and LV network lines. Since 2018, when we undertook a major review, we've made considerable investments to get a better understanding through the implementation of an aerial services wing. So we have 3 helicopters in the business inspecting our network annually, as well as utilising LiDAR technology to give us a better quantitative understanding of the encroachment of vegetation on our network. That investment has given us a much better state of knowledge of where our non-compliance is. And in Victoria, we operate under the electricity safety regulations, which require us, or we operate under a literal compliance to those regulations, whereby when we find vegetation non-compliance, we are non-compliant to that code and required to remediate things immediately or prevent those things from happening before they grow close enough, I suppose you could say. So really, what the step change that we're proposing relates to is an extension of this strategy to get a better understanding of our non-compliance and now subsequently grow our resource base to cut those non-compliance spans in higher volume, as well as in a more timely fashion. We've seen a greater attention to this area from ESV, with a much increased focus and emphasis on prevention of encroachment on the network, and they're utilising their enforcement powers to, prosecute us where we're unable to achieve that. So this step change in additional funding will see us grow our resource base to have the resources to respond in a more timely fashion to the increased non-compliant vegetation spans that we're now finding through the implementation of this technology. Pleasingly, what we'll see out of this strategy is an increased safety risk management. We'll see improved compliance to the regulations and Electricity Safety Act requirements, but we'll also identified a reliability benefit to customers where less vegetation impacting our network will improve power quality for those customers. So whilst the story is one of knowing more what we need to do, it's also allowing us to better manage that risk for our customers, as well as all of and improving our safety and reliability outcomes as well. So I might just pause there, Genevieve, and maybe hand back to yourself.
Thank you so much for that, James, and thank you everyone for your presentations. So we are on to the question and answers part of the day. We do have some pre-submitted questions, so I'll get started with those, but please feel free to post your questions in the chat and we'll be able to go through. So we've got, and I'll just stop sharing my screen just so that everyone will be able to see the presenters when we're answering the questions. So to kick it off, and I think this is one that's been fairly common across when we've been talking with customers about the draft proposal, and that is, well, how are you having all of these changes and expenditure and not having any impact on customers' bills? So I might throw that across to Renate, if you could have a go at answering that one.
Terrific, Jen. Yeah, and we do get that question quite a lot, and it's a good question. The reason why that there is no impact on bills, though we're proposing a significant step up in capital expenditure, is really twofold. One, we're seeing, because of the shift towards electrification and the increase in population, we're forecasting, a significant increase in annual consumption per year. So it's really just expenditure divided by volumes. The more consumption you have, the lower your price. The second reason is because of a lot of our investment that we propose is capital expenditure. The way the regulatory regime works is that we get the funding for that capital expenditure over the life of the asset. And the majority of our assets have a very, very long life in terms of network assets, not IT, as Alex pointed out, but certainly in terms of network. It can be something between 50 to 60 years. So as a result, this investment has a limited impact on short-term prices. Hopefully that's answered the question, Jen.
Thanks, Renate. So next question, and this might have to be divided up into a couple of parts, but just looking at the overall proposal, what are some of the key challenges that you see for the proposal? So I might split this up into one being, how the proposal is going to go to the regulator and having approval from the regulator to Renate. And then I might hand over to Glenn, Alex and James in terms of, actually delivering these really big program of works across the 26 to 31 period. So Renate, some of the challenges for this proposal.
I think, really, one of the challenges, and it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I think, I noted in my presentation, we're really seeing, significant changes in the energy industry, and they are significant. They're the most significant changes we've seen since the formation of the national electricity market. So there's a lot going on. With increasing population, we're seeing a shift towards electrification, both in terms of connection and in terms of transport. We're seeing aging infrastructure. We're seeing, more and more, I guess it doesn't impact so much CitiPower, but more extreme weather events. And we're also seeing our consumers actually become more dependent on electricity than ever before as we shift towards electrification and more of our customers stay at home, either to work or care for loved ones. So all of this it's a lot to manage. It's a lot to manage for government, regulators, customers, and us as an industry to make sure, that we future-proof the network for this new energy future. So it's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity.
Thank you, Renate. Glenn, what are some of the key challenges that you see in the program for 26 to 31 from a RepEx and OrgEx perspective?
Thanks, Jenya. I think if we look at the last 5 years as a good proxy, I mean, there's no doubt we're part of a global community. There's been no shortage of supply chain shocks for numerous reasons, whether it be COVID, unfortunately numerous wars, and they do impact equipment manufacture, logistics, and all that has cost associated with it. There's also the fact that everyone in the globe is trying to do the same energy transition at the same time. So at the end of the day, Australia is generally a technology taker. So we've definitely, being a relatively small country, get impacted by costs we can't control, because if everyone's trying to do the same thing at the same time, then we've got a supply-demand challenge and all prices go up. So that's certainly a challenge. Resourcing all these plans is always hard. And again, as we've seen over the last 5 years, with everyone trying to do the same thing at the same time, it's very hard to react quickly to get new resources which are qualified, competent and experienced, because we've generally been relied on immigration to fill some holes, and that's been clearly a challenge of recent, and again puts pressure on rates and labour costs. And the other thing, new obligations, whether they be licence obligations, compliance obligations, every year there seems to be one or two more which we didn't expect, which changes your plan. So that makes it very challenging, because what we want to do ultimately is the more we can plan things, the lower the cost is. When things come in that are unplanned, you generally have shocks to the system, things need to get delayed, changed, and it's a never-ending challenge. So we know we've got a plan. Delivery will be a plan that's changing all the time, but we're trying to keep those costs as low as possible. But as I said, if the last 5 years is a proxy, it's going to be bumpy. But we know this next 5 years is far more important, given where almost the velocity of the energy transition seems to be unstoppable for the next 5 years.
Thanks, Glenn. I'll throw to Alex for some of the key IT challenges that we might see in that 26 to 31 period.
Look, I don't know. I think I'd probably just say what Glenn said. It applies exactly in my area as well. Just the amount of different things that are needing to be done, the competition around the industry and globally for the people, the experts that you need to engage to actually do it. The fact that new things are going to be introduced in this period that we don't even know what they are yet, from whether it's state, federal government regulators. We will see new things come in that are not on that list, as we did in the last regulatory period. Funnily enough, the big project in terms of the ERP billing replacement is the one that we know the most about, because we're not doing this earlier than most other businesses. And so we can use people and companies and software that's actually already been done before. So it's not so much that particular item, it's more just the amount of change, the scarcity of skill sets. And I'll also say the fact that this is innovative, and a lot of the things that we're doing with the energy industry and the system at the moment are things that just haven't been done anywhere else. There's no example in Europe or the US necessarily of somebody who's been doing this for the last 5 or 10 years. We're breaking new ground in some of the things we're doing, and that always comes with a challenge and an uncertainty. Thanks, Jen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. And just to finish off on the question, James, are there any key challenges that you see from a vegetation management perspective for CitiPower?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably a little bit narrower than what both Glenn and Alex have highlighted here, given it's a sort of single domain, but really, growing our skilled resource base and having the resources to address the identified risk quickly now that we've made such a significant investment and step change in our understanding of our non-compliance and non-conformance areas. Being able to respond quickly as stipulated under the code is probably what my greatest challenge and focus is right now. So we do see regulators taking an increasingly stronger stance on timeframes, and really that means having the skilled flex resources to respond quickly is something that we've got to invest in. So that's probably considerably narrower than Alex and Glenn mentioning, but no less important.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. And maybe just touching on what Alex said, mentioned as well with, things that are coming up that are unplanned. We've got a question on, well, what happens if things that you haven't planned for come up in the period? I might throw to you, Renate, for that one. How does that impact customers?
In terms of, in terms of funding, if we don't get the funding for it, we've got a number of mechanisms that we can potentially seek additional funding to the Australian Energy Regulator if the costs are significant, or if the costs are driven by a rule change or a change in our licence obligation. In terms of how it impacts customers, it shouldn't impact customers. We're very focused on delivering the best service for our customers at the cheapest, costs. So, for us, really, it's about planning for a period of great uncertainty. So we worked really, really hard to develop a plan that really has no regrets investment and can really accommodate a whole range of potential changes and level of uncertainty, because, this period is incredibly uncertain, and it's really difficult to forecast 5 years out in terms of what the landscape is going to look like. We've worked very hard in trying to have a more balanced approach.
Thank you, Renate. The next question is for Glenn. And it's on electrification. So how does CitiPower intend to support the rapid electrification of both commercial and residential properties in CitiPower?
Well, the way we forecast assumes that is happening. All these sort of, whether it be new obligations, government policy, we use AEMO data to try and get our forecast as accurate as possible. As I said through the presentation, the last thing we want to do is be in the way of stopping the energy transition, or a scenario where we've got vehicles that can't charge would not be where we want to be. So our job is to ensure, one, we put it to the regulator that let's not get there, and ensure we're funded to ensure it happens ahead of time. And that's certainly for the community forums I've been at with the regulation team, that's certainly been the strong message. We'd rather have the investment before we need it than afterwards, because they certainly understand the consequences of being too late. Our job is to get that forecast right, push for the funding, and get the investment in the right place at the right time, because we know the consequence of not doing that is we're on the front page and we're part of the problem. So it's fairly clear for us, but forecasts do change. They're generally wrong the day you do them, but it's something have dedicated resources to focus on and manage and try and get that as accurate as possible.
Thank you very much for that, Glenn. Our next question is for Alex, and it's looking at network data. So starting off with a bit of a comment, access to network data to support better energy management and connection decisions is going to be critical for an efficient energy transition. What are you intending to do to make data more accessible?
So we've got some initiatives in the current proposal that address that. Certainly a chunk of the AEMO regulatory compliance initiatives that I talked about before are all about market data interchange and being able to get larger volumes of data moving around more quickly. And that also means that that data can be available for external consumption. There are some plans as well, some of the smaller items that we didn't talk about specifically in the presentation for analytic or even digital twin type functionality, which really means the data that comes from all of the different places where it might come from, whether it's the people fixing the assets on the trucks, or from the meters, or from the market billing, or wherever it comes from, about bringing that all together in a consistent way and then making it available. This is one of the big challenges of technology at the moment, where the amount of data that we've got is exploding, and keeping it all together and moving it around fast is critical to delivering that. So I would say all of the initiatives we have must give us an improvement in terms of the consistency, the volumes, and the speed of the data that we have. And that's just going to be an ongoing journey. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Alex. The next question I'll throw to Renate. How are you ensuring that customers not easily able to participate in the energy transition aren't left behind, or subsidising other customers?
That is a great question. Look, today there is cross-subsidisation. It's actually happening today. And this theme of customers that can't participate in the energy transition, whether or not they come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or they lack agencies, such as they're a renter, or they're from regional and rural communities, that they can't actually get the benefits of the energy transition, has really, really emerged more than any other regulatory reset. So what we're doing is, we've got a number of packages really focused on those customers. So, for example, for our regional and rural customers, we have proposed funding to accommodate them. Obviously, that's not so much of an impact on CitiPower. For CitiPower, we have, we have a customer vulnerability package to really assist those customers to understand their tariffs, to be educated in terms of how they can actually benefit from changing their customer behaviour. And we've also tried to balance the investment in relation to the energy transition to make sure that we're not going too hard, that we are targeting where it's needed.
Sounds a bit like what Glenn was saying in terms of the right spend at the right time,
yes.
Just to make sure that's going to lead to the best outcomes for customers. Thank you, Renate. The next question, and it's good to see there's attention to the graphs as well. So the historical expenditure, if you looked at some of the capital expenditure graphs for both the IT and for the REPEX, is below what's being forecast for the next period. What are going to be the impacts of delivering these step ups, these uplifts in spend from both a network and IT perspective? So I might throw to Glenn first to touch on network, and then Alex on IT.
Sure, thanks, Jen. It's a good question. As I said earlier, some of the costs related to CitiPower over the last period were impacted by COVID and what happened during the lockdown periods. But also through the supply chain shock and the if you like, the labour shortages, we've definitely seen cost increase. So it's a combination of volumes increasing because of age, and then also cost going up, whether it be supply chain or labour. So We know it's coming, the volumes are there, we can see it happening, so we need to resource accordingly. And then the costs related with it are really just a function of volume and the increase in costs, which have impacted everyone in our sector. It's almost like a superinflation in some respects, because, as I said, everyone's trying to do the same thing. So they're the two things driving increased costs. We know what we need to do in terms of volume, so we'll resource accordingly. But they're the challenges and drivers underpinning that.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll hand over to Alex for the IT steps.
Yeah, I mean, in IT, the increase is not in the recurrent expenditure; it's in the non-recurrent. So the thing we don't do every time, and in the regulatory compliance area. In the non-recurrent, it just reflects really the timelines that the system vendors like SAP and the like are imposing on the industry. And, like I said before, the challenge is really what to leave out. We've left this basically as long as it's sensible. So it does reflect what we have to do. In the regulatory compliance area, I'll say that we're following the timelines that AEMO and the other kind of market authorities give us. So we're not making this up. We have seen historically some of those ones tend to be a little over ambitious and slip. And to be honest, if that happens, we wouldn't be sad, because if it takes a little bit longer to do some of those things, it'll probably help us in terms of deliverability. But we just have to do the best we can to keep up with the industry, because with a lot of these changes, until everybody can do it, nobody can do it. So what we've got there doesn't reflect a more ambitious view from our perspective. It simply reflects what we have to do. And at least, we're still a couple of years out with some of these things. So we do have some lead time to ramp it up, but it is going to be hard.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. And continuing on the cost trend for the questions, we've got a question in terms of the revenue for the last regulatory period. So I'll take that as the current regulatory period, and maybe throw to Renate and Jeff if you want to add anything in. So the question is, did you spend all of your revenue in for the current regulatory period, or I guess do you expect to spend all of your revenue for the current regulatory period?
Yeah, so in terms of, maybe I'll flip it around and say, in terms of the funding that we're allowed, yes, we do intend to spend all of it. In fact, we probably could have overspent, but we are very focused on ensuring that we keep a lid on prices. As a business, we're very focused on operational efficiency. I will note as well, for those who are unfamiliar with the regulatory regime, we do operate under a revenue cap, so that in terms of revenue, that revenue is actually set across the 5 years. And then if we underspend, we get to pocket a percentage of that underspend, and the rest goes back to customers. But yeah, it's been very challenging, as Glenn has outlined, for this regulatory control period. So yeah, there'll be no underspends.
Thanks, Renate. Maybe I'll throw to Jeff for the next question, which is, did you engage with vulnerable and diverse customers in preparing the draft proposal, and you're specifically looking at the, how the proposal's supporting vulnerable customers?
Thanks, Jen. We certainly did. I think it's an area that I think the industry has improved, and ourselves very much included in that, and how we engage with customers, not just to kind of test whether our proposals are hitting the mark, but in the build-up and the sort of the construction, the development of those proposals. And I think that's certainly the case in that sort of customers that may be experiencing sort of vulnerable circumstances as well. There's in our customer advisory panel, for example, we have a number of members that sit on that work in that space every day, and to be able to leverage their feedback and their insights to shape the package of works that as part of our overall proposal has been really pivotal. Our engagement program has been across a number of different phases as well. It started very broad and wide to kind of make sure we're capturing what sort of the broad themes that customers sort of wanted us to focus on, and then narrowed down further into more specifics. The phase we're currently in now is more around testing and validating whether what we've heard and how we're proposing to respond to that hits the mark. And that includes our sort of, I guess, these sessions like today, but it includes the vulnerable customer assistance package as well.
Could I also add to that, Jen, that we did have a number of forums jointly with the other Victorian distributors, specifically on our vulnerable customers. And obviously there was a great debate as to whether or not distributors in fact had a role in supporting vulnerable customers. And I think in general the response was yes, but in partnership also with other groups who really have the expertise in managing and supporting vulnerable customers.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Renate. Following on from the customer assistance package as well, we've got a question in terms of, if we've engaged with First Nations communities on the proposals, noting the First Peoples program. I might throw that to Renate.
But you can really answer that question, Jen. You're totally across it. Look, it's something I'm actually really, really proud of. I think that, and certainly the AER and others in the industry have stated this, is that I think as a distribution network service business, we've done more engagement with First People in respect to the development of our plans than any other. We've got some incredible people who work in our business, from First People who've assisted us, and we've had very targeted and specific engagement with our First People, whether or not it's internally we have a First People's advisory committee, or we've done specific engagement with First People. We did a great session with the Yorta community in Shepparton. And we've learned a lot, and we've gotten some great insights. So from that, we've actually got some proposed funding set aside to actually support First People, whether or not that's through energy audits, education of their bills, or supporting them through community energy renewable projects. And it's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you very much for that, Renate. The next question is, I'll put to Glenn. How are you lowering carbon emissions through sort of the network capital works and program, or how is that considered?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of our assessment whenever we're doing anything. We've got a value of carbon. I mean, most of what we do is really facilitate others deploying renewable energy onto our network. In saying that, we do have a lot of fleet, and CitiPower is certainly a network where we can have an electric fleet to reduce our carbon emissions from fleet. So that's something we certainly have in the plan. Line losses is generally the other thing, which is much harder to do. And the other thing we have in our many of our switches have some CO2 related gases, which again, early days in transition, but we're certainly working on how to get new switches which are CO2 free, or SF6 free to be specific, but that's easier said than done. That's more piloting things over the next period, as opposed to a large, if you like, change out of fleet. We would only change them out when they're end of life. So that's probably in the next period when we'll start to see that. But yeah, short-term focus largely on, in terms of things we can directly control, is on fleet. But our major contribution is really making sure it's as easy and as least cost as possible for customers to connect renewables to the network.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Glenn. I'll throw the question in the chat now as well, which I think is looking at for CitiPower, is the intention going to be to have new site acquisitions if the existing sites that CitiPower has, don't have the capacity to expand, and how that can be managed with growth within the city? There might be another one for you, Glenn. Sorry.
I can cover that, and Malkosh could have just come around and asked me directly, given his internal. We're always looking at that, making sure we've got the sites we need. Obviously, from a CitiPower perspective, there's not exactly large swathes of land available, so we're always looking to make sure we've got options to either expand or retrofit as required. So I would call that business as usual. But yeah, I don't think it's a major issue. It's ultimately tied to the forecast and how much low growth we expect. But that's in hand.
Fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. So we just have 3 more pre-submitted questions, and we are on track to finish early, although we've got Laura's just put in a follow-up question to Glenn, so it's good we're sparking some discussion. What are some of the things that you're doing to make it easier and more affordable or accessible for customers to connect renewables and distributed energy resources?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've done a lot, particularly over the last period, in terms of making sure. We used to have quite a constraint on where there was quite a concentration of rooftop solar in a certain area. There'll be limits to that through various initiatives, including in IT, and with our smart meter analytics, we've been able to increase that. So most customers can install without any constraints. And certainly the most recent initiative, which is the LV DERMS tool we've built, and plus the next step of providing flexible export arrangements, that's probably been the predominant focus to allow customers to connect and export as needed. I think sometimes that export is somewhat overvalued but that's a customer choice. Ideally, customers are sizing it for their own needs. It's probably within their best interest. But there are many who want to export as much as possible and maximise their roof space, which is fine. So our job is to get that balance right between making it affordable and not restricting anyone. At the same time, we do have an obligation to make sure we comply with the electricity code and keep voltage at a level which is to every customer's advantage. So it's a bit of a balancing item, but there's certainly been a lot of investment the last few years, and that'll continue to be optimized, particularly with analytics, to make sure we can unlock value where we can and ensure customers understand that.
Thank you very much for that, Glenn. And I might have a follow-up question to Renate on that, which is a related one, which is looking at the flexible export products. Is that going to mean customers, make less money from exporting their excess solar if they're going to have a flexible export product?
No, but you would see that the Victorian government has decided to stop PFIT, the PFIT scheme, which I know a lot of customers are very, very unhappy about. What it will do is that they'll be able to maximise their ability to export solar. I mean, previously for CitiPower, for solar customers, we had an export limit of 5 kilowatt, and the majority of customers actually have solar systems that are in fact more like, I think, 6.6 kilowatt. So what they'll be able to do now is that they'll be able to sign up, and this is new customers, new customers sign up to a flexible connection agreement, which will enable them to export majority of time up to 10 kilowatts if they want to. However, the static limit will be much, much lower. But look, the greatest benefit from solar is not exporting, it's actually through self-consumption.
Thank you for that, Renate. And what does that mean for existing customers as well? So you mentioned that was for new customers.
Yes. So for existing customers, that they can continue to be on their their existing agreement, which is a 5 kilowatt static limit. However, if they want to opt to a flexible connection agreement, they can do so.
Fantastic. We've got just 2 more questions, and I think we'll finish up a bit early unless we've got a host of questions that come through in the chat. So another one for you, Renate, which is about customers who can't afford solar, or can't afford electric vehicles. Why is it that everyone pays, or why are they footing the bill for those who can afford to install solar panels and have electric vehicles?
Yeah, so in terms of solar, we actually have very little, and Jeff might want to jump in here, or zero, very, very little proposed augmentation for solar exports. And I think Glenn sort of referred to the fact that you actually don't get a huge amount of benefit from exporting solar. And we saw that. So, we saw that through about customer surveys, that customers don't actually value exporting solar very much. So going forward, customers who can't afford solar won't have to pay for, customers wanting to export solar. In terms of EVs, what we're doing is we are investing to ensure that customers' reliability won't be impacted by other customers with EVs being able to charge their electric vehicles. So the more customers who charge their EVs will actually see a reduction in voltage and see a reliability impact. This will, we're managing this through augmenting the network. However, it's important to point out that even though we're making these proposals, as we said previously, there's actually going to be no impact on the residential bill. So, customers who can't afford an EV at this stage, they're not going to pay anymore. So, there's just no impact. So it's really a win-win.
Fantastic. Thank you, Renate. And lucky last for Glenn, I've got a question on the technical and safety or non-financial consequences of not pursuing, say, that proactive meter replacement program. So what will happen, I guess, from a technical and safety side of things if we looked at, say, a reactive or not pursuing that proactive meter replacement program?
Yeah, well, from a network safety perspective, the reality is, meters can fail, and some of the types of failure modes, tend to do with deterioration of how it's connected. And the last we want is meters causing fires or other issues. So safety-wise, it's something we will never compromise on. And the reality is, once things get older, things do deteriorate. This is an electronic device. As I said, it's not a mechanical device. So other outside of safety, which is paramount, there's many other forms of failure, more to do with sort of electronics. It can things called last gasp, where it just constantly reboots. Batteries can run out of life. They run out of read-write limits, which we know are nearing the end. And for those that are in the sector, when we did a big project called 5-minute settlement through the last period, that resulted in a requirement for 6 times the amount of read-writes. You can have measurement errors where it just flatlines. There's a whole host of issues which we'd rather avoid. So as I said, the primary goal here is, outside of safety, is to ensure we keep costs for consumers as low as possible. So yeah, the two things are linked, but yeah, we certainly don't want to see meters becoming a safety risk, because the safety risk is actually for consumers, not necessarily for our people. So yeah, that will be another key factor in ensuring we get it done ahead of time, rather than create a material issue for the entire community.
And we've had another question sneak in. I think just it had to take us to 1:30. I'll pass this to Glenn and then get Renate maybe to finish up or add in any comments on it. How confident are you about the expected uptake of and impact of electric vehicles? And what happens if the reality is markedly different to your forecast?
Very good question. And if we knew the exact answer to EV uptake and what type of EVs, that would be very helpful. We are using AEMO's forecast, which have, to the point of the question, have definitely been lowering over time, which is a good thing in my mind. It gives us more time to be ready for it. The other thing to note, there's lots of different versions of EVs. You've got plug-in hybrids versus full EVs, which do have a different impact on the network. So I would say, if the plan is as per the current AEMO forecast, we're in good shape. If for some reason there's an acceleration of full EV uptake, then I think all networks across Australia will probably be in some challenges, particularly where there's a concentration of EVs, because we've already seen, even with the small number of EVs we have, there is certainly customer inquiries. Some of the software of those EVs isn't necessarily designed for Australian code compliance, and they'll stop changing charging whenever there's a voltage drop or increase. So this will definitely evolve. If there's a slowdown in terms of the uptake, we'll be in good shape, because hopefully the AER has given the allowances we've asked for, and the charging infrastructure and capacity will be there. If it accelerates, then I suggest for some consumers in certain areas have probably got some challenges for a period of time.
Thank you, Glenn. Renate, was there anything you wanted to add for that question?
I thought Glenn responded to that very, very well. I note that Dean did ask that question, and I think he'll appreciate this response. Maybe the Victorian government will be more open to cost-reflective tariffs, and with EV customers mandatorily assigned time of use tariffs, they will respond perfectly and charge their EVs in the middle of the day. And so hopefully we'll see little further impact on the network and capital investment needed.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to thank everyone who has joined us for this town hall today, and particularly thank Renate, Glenn, Alex, James and Jeff for presenting and for taking us through and answering those questions. We've just posted in the chat as well for more information on our draft regulatory proposal. We are inviting feedback. We really welcome any of your thoughts and responses on what's being proposed. You can submit this at engage.citipower.com.au, and we'll also be sharing the recording and the Q&As on our website and will be emailed through to you after this session. So the journey doesn't end here. We're looking forward to continuing to hear your feedback, and we'll be publishing our proposals to the Australian Energy Regulator in January 2025. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.